disadvantaged businesses and workforce. And so we have a number of legislative requirements that we have to meet within the legislation, and that is one of them. Aligns nicely with the DMC goal of creating jobs. Today I'm just going to go over some of the goals of that program and some of the successes and opportunities that we have, and then just acquaint you a little bit with the legislation. So again, we do have those goals in place. They are a creature of the statute along with American-made steel and some other requirements. Right now, our goals are based on a plan adopted by the City Council. So for targeted businesses, women, minority-owned businesses that are providing services to our infrastructure and our private development projects that receive support from DMC, we have a goal of 4% of the total construction value to be allocated to those contracts. And for workforce participation, we're asking people to at least have 4% of the workforce be minority and disadvantaged individuals, and then 6% for women. These are the projects in which
before moving off that, could I just put a marker down? Maybe we can come back to, but this is a partnership between the city and the state and the private entities. The state has different requirements than the city that I believe require a higher participation level.
Yep.
And I think maybe at the end of this discussion, we should have a conversation about which of these levels are being followed, because in my mind, there's state money in this, and we should be following the state level, not the lower city level.
Yeah, and we have some slides that speak to that, Your Honor. And, you know, so the message is we have our plan. We've predominantly been in a role where we've just been evaluating compliance. We've brought new capacity onto our team, so I just at this point also would like to acknowledge Jory Johnson, our project manager that deals with our WMBE program specifically, and has really set up a great program for compliance because it's important also for our prevailing wage related issues. But really the mission there is to get to the next level of communications and outreach to grow the goal, and we'll talk to you about a standard that we can look at into the future. We understand that these are modest goals. They're the starting point, but we certainly have aspirations to grow that. These are the projects that we're currently evaluating for compliance. They're generally projects that you're familiar with in the course of your discussions. Again, a mix of private development projects as well as public infrastructure. We have been, exceeding our goals at this point in many of our areas. So as we look at targeted business, goal is 4%. We've been achieving 6.5%, and then 5.2% for our professional services and construction administration. Moving on to workforce participation, which is really a key component of what we do. Our goal for women, actually, we are below our goal there. We've had some challenge in meeting that. And then for minority workforce participation, we're actually well in excess of our goal, and so we're 12.7%. Oftentimes, and we'll show you some of the successes that we have, but oftentimes this becomes a discussion with the contracting community of the ability to contract locally versus the ability to meet these goals. And so we'll speak about some of the strategy around that later. And again, we're doing very well when it comes to construction administration for women, not as well from a minority perspective. Also didn't note, but the legislation does require our projects to adhere to prevailing wage, which basically sets a livable wage for the type of occupation that work is being performed at. Just proud to report that on average for DMC construction projects, $39 an hour is being paid, which is about $80,000 a year for people that are working on the jobs within DMC. And I also say that $13.3 million, or 54% of those wages, are within areas or drawn from the workforce within our area here. But you also note that there is a bit of a larger national reach.
Let's go back to that. Before you comment, Mayor, if I could just say, that map shows in the entire region, but 54% of the wages are within Rochester zip codes specifically.
Got it. So you anticipated a question. I had, no, I'm glad you did it because, you know, we've talked about this idea of how we can use our buying power to impact the economy of this region, the non-metro part of this region. So what you're saying there is that even though the map includes the metro area, that 54% number is,
In and around Rochester.
Got it.
So the 59 zip code, 559 zip code. But I think the map also illustrates, you know, this is obviously you know, there's a state of Minnesota interest here. The vast majority of the wages being paid are coming from Minnesota companies as well. And so there is some national, you know, wages and contractors that are on the projects, but significant amount of it, over half, are coming locally.
So
Secretary
just
West.
a related question. So am I interpreting right that 46% of the wages are being paid outside of the Rochester area? Is that correct?
That is correct.
So just when we get into the conversation about MBE, DBE contracts, so these companies obviously know how to do this work, and I think in the Twin Cities do a great job actually in many cases. So my question eventually will be if they're drawing wages 46% outside of the Rochester area zip code, are they also able to attract talent, right, diverse talent?
I see.
From outside the zip code as well. So
Yeah.
just as we think about those,
Right.
those goals.
Mayor, go ahead.
Yeah, and I would just say that is the challenge because as we move toward hitting higher goals with our diverse workforce, it does perhaps mean less local people getting the contracts, and there's concern, and I think, you know, that's going to be a challenge, and how are we going to do that? And so I think that is something we just need to keep talking about as we move ahead.
Yeah, and I think the point you're making there is a great one about how we keep the balance on it. And I think the best way is for us to get all of the facts on that. I imagine it wouldn't be that difficult for you to do a scattergram that broke down non-metro a little more. Would it, I mean, how hard or easy is that? The reason I'm asking is because I think it might be helpful just to send us out between meetings, something that breaks that down a little bit more, because we do want to hold up the issue of this project raising the economy of southern Minnesota, which is different than Rochester, which obviously is different than Metro. And if we could sort of break that down, because my understanding of Mayo's workforce is that it's quite spread out around southern Minnesota, and I think we want to see whether that same thing is happening with construction. And then the idea of breaking that issue, of us holding up this issue of inclusion and local, and that is a balance that we're supposed to do, as long as we keep the balance in front of ourselves and have the facts. Commissioner Beer.
Yeah, one thing I want just in my back of the envelope, you know, around Rochester and southeastern Minnesota, we're having a hard time finding workers. So, you know, whether you have 54% or 60% or whatever, there's a lot of help wanted signs around here. And so I think we're pretty much at full employment around here, whether it's women and minorities or, you know, whoever. I think if you want a job, you got a job around here right now.
Go ahead.
Just
Secretary
another
Williams.
piece of this. So from my perspective, my question eventually will be, can we draw a more diverse workforce even from within the 46% that's coming from outside the region as a way of just strengthening that goal, right? So I don't assume that those folks would have to come from within the Rochester, whatever that zip code is.
Yeah.
Your Honor, I think the data would speak to the fact that a lot of our diverse workforce, but particularly our diverse businesses, are coming from outside the region. And part of the strategy moving forward will be to try to create that win-win. Can we create and grow the diverse base of businesses and workforce within our region? So I think that's part of our strategy moving forward.
You know, I got a really good lesson on working from two different jobs on the stadium. One is on the football stadium. When we did that, we had a very high 35% participation from women and minority contractors.